Hello? Oh, yeah. What? Wait, slow down. You missed. With all of them? Wait, you didn't hit anything? Oh, come on, you could. What? It's not your fault. It's the torpedo's fault. Yeah, right. Yeah. January 2nd, 1942. Japan invaded China in 1937, thinking they'd win in a few months. That was not the case. Germany invaded Poland in 1939, and by now, Germany and Japan and the other Axis powers have invaded over 20 nations, dominions, and colonies on 3 continents. But as 1942 dawns, those allied against the Axis powers declare their solidarity and form the United Nations. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Japanese captured both Wake Island and Hong Kong and continued to advance in the Philippines and Malaya. In the USSR, the Red Army continued to make gains even as the Germans continued to shake up their high command. And the Anglo-American Arcadia Conference began to make plans for how they will prosecute the war. The Arcadia Conference continues this week, and indeed, it starts the year with a bang. On the 1st, 26 nations signed the Declaration of the United Nations at the conference. They meet in Washington, D.C. to endorse the principles of the Atlantic Charter from last August. They will deploy all resources against the Axis powers and make no separate peace. This is a very big deal. Another very big deal from Arcadia is the establishment of a joint British-American command structure. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and the Royal Navy resist this, but eventually all are persuaded to have unity of command in major theaters of war where combined forces are to deploy. One supreme commander would command all land, sea, and air forces for that theater. Of course, there are at least some rights of appeal along national lines, but these are not to erode the authority of the commander. British General Archie Wavell is made Supreme Commander of ABDA, American, British, Dutch, Australian Theater. Chiang Kai-shek is to be Supreme Commander of the China Theater. The next day, American President Franklin Roosevelt and Churchill preside over a meeting that calls for an enormous increase in the American arms program. 3 weeks ago, it was decided to build 12,750 aircraft by the end of 1943. That number is now 45,000. 15,450 tanks is also now 45,000, and 262,000 machine guns are now 500,000. On the Axis side of things, on New Year's Eve, Adolf Hitler tells his staff at Rastenburg that he hopes 1942 brings him as much good fortune as 1941. And 1941 saw his forces take Yugoslavia and Greece and a huge chunk of the Western Soviet Union, but the USSR is anything but defeated as the new year begins. In fact, the Soviet 44th and 51st Armies have landed in eastern Crimea to take Feodosia, some 40,000 men strong. These are a threat to the German 11th Army, and it must break off its attacks on Sevastopol to deal with them. The Romanian divisions defending, though, are routed, and by the end of the week, Kerch and Feodosia are securely in Soviet hands, although Soviet paratroopers landing at Kerch are ineffective. Taking Feodosia threatens the flank of the German 42nd Corps. Its commander, Hans von Sponeck, will withdraw the 46th Division despite High Command repeatedly denying his request to do so. But this is all just a part of a planned Red Army offensive by Semyon Timoshenko to take out all of German Army Group South. The Bryansk front would attack west into the Orel-Kursk area. The southwestern front would help and would also take Kharkov and Krasnogad. The southern front would take the Dnieper crossings at Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporozhye. And after all this, Army Group South would just be strangled in the Crimea and east of the Dnieper. Further north, the Red Army is on the move already now. On the 31st, they take Kozelsk, west of the Medin-Oral defensive line the Germans established 3 weeks ago. On the 1st, they retake Staritsa, and on the 2nd, Maloyaroslavets. They are by now fighting to break into and through the Rzhev, Naro, Maloyaroslavets Vyazma line. Joseph Stalin and Stavka think this would be doom for the Germans. The ultimate kill was what Stalin was now aiming for, all the more convinced that to physical defeat must be added the effects of moral collapse within the German army in the east. It was under the overriding influence of these impressions that Stalin embarked on putting the final touches to what was soon to become a general Red Army counteroffensive to be unleashed early in the new year. But if the Red Army is fighting back against invaders this week, that is not really the case in the Philippines, as the American withdrawal to Bataan Peninsula continues. By the 30th, Jonathan Wainwright's North Luzon force has reached the main road into Bataan, where he is to cover the South Luzon force entering it before he follows suit. That day, the Japanese bomb Corregidor. Now, in the Philippines, the U.S. has 4 P-40s, 5 P-35s, and 4 non-combat planes. That's all. This is 7% of the air strength they had back on the 8th, and that's not even counting the B-17 bombers. The approximately 12 Australian-based B-17s represented about 34% of the B-17 strength on December 8th. The figures for 31st of December reveal that a decisive cause of the extinction of American air power in the Philippines was the loss of fighter aircraft. With loss of local air control, the B-17s had to flee, as do the American and Filipino troops who finish evacuating Manila the 31st. On the 2nd, the Japanese occupy Manila and Cavite Air Base. They already destroyed the Cavite Navy Yard from the air in the first days of the offensive. And with it, the U.S. Asiatic Fleet's reserve supply of torpedoes. This is a bigger deal than you may imagine, because undersea warfare, particularly unrestricted submarine warfare, was an American plan to deal with Japanese shipping in case of war. Japan still needs to roam the seas to bring almost every sort of supply to the home islands, and knocking out their merchant shipping could seriously cripple their economy and their war effort. The U.S. Asiatic Fleet has 23 modern fleet submarines and 6 older S-boats, but they have failed so far to make any dent whatsoever in Japanese shipping. There are command issues, there are mechanical problems, there is the destruction of the whole reserve supply of torpedoes, but there is also what Richard Frank calls the Great Torpedo Fiasco. See, Eugene McKinney has been pretty proactive with the submarine he captains in the waters of Lingayen Gulf attacking the Japanese. But being daring means nothing when he doesn't hit much of anything with his torpedoes. By now, the evidence is mounting from all quarters that there is a problem with the torpedoes in general. On the 2nd, the Bureau of Ordnance admits they are running 4 feet deeper than they are set. It turns out to be more than that. There is, though, a big positive thing to consider for the Americans. Commander Douglas MacArthur's forces are still intact. They've managed to hold together for 2 weeks under constant pressure from a superior opponent by land, sea, and sky, and they have made it to Bataan. As long as they hold, the Japanese cannot use Manila Harbor, which they very much want for operations further south. So the decision to withdraw the Luzon forces suddenly means the Japanese, who thought they'd won an easy battle on the 23rd, now have what might be a long and deadly siege ahead of them. The Japanese also have it tougher than they expected this week in China. Their attacks toward Changsha continue, and by the 29th, they are convinced they can take the city, and the 3rd and 6th divisions close in. The 3rd breaks into the southeast of the city, but is halted. But by the end of the week, the added pressure from the 6th is making gains. But the Japanese are surprised by the number and strength of the city's defenders. They have, however, been advancing rapidly in British Malaya. By the 30th, they have reached Kampar in the west and Kuantan in the east. Japan has now taken most of the territory that produces 38% of the world's rubber and 58% of its tin. With the Japanese threatening the western Malayan trunk road and able to make assaults anywhere along the coast from the sea, British Commander Arthur Percival figures that if they can also secure air bases in central Malaya, they will destroy Singapore's ability to resupply and reinforce itself. He says, "To achieve our objective of protecting the naval base, it was necessary to fight the main battle on the mainland, and it was hoped to be able to deploy all the reinforcements due to arrive in January for that purpose." He wants to hold the Japanese in central Malaya as long as possible. As we saw last week, this is the opposite of what Winston Churchill wants to do. The 11th Indian Division has been defending at the Perak River since the 23rd, but Lewis Heath, commanding the 3rd Indian Corps, thinks it's too wide to defend, so he now deploys his forces around Ipoh and Kampar. There's been some changes in defense deployment elsewhere this week in North Africa. Now, on the 28th and the 30th, Britain's 22nd Armored Brigade takes big damage when counterattacked by the Axis forces south of Agadabia. Erwin Rommel's Axis forces have been withdrawing out of Cyrenaica and had reached Agadabia, but on the 1st decide to pull even further back to El Agheila. Allied Commander Neil Ritchie will not realize this until the 5th, but he doesn't really have the armor or the supplies to prevent it anyhow. On the 2nd, the Axis garrison at Bardia surrenders. It's held out since Operation Crusader began in November. Rommel has been having serious problems being resupplied, and the solution for that might well be Malta. On December 31st, smiling Albert Kesselring issues a directive for the Battle of Malta, stating that neutralizing Malta is the indispensable precondition for establishing secure lines of communication between Italy and North Africa. Back at the end of November, Luftwaffe Fliegerkorps 2 was transferred from the Eastern Front to the Mediterranean, and Kesselring was made Commander-in-Chief Luftwaffe South. But even before this directive, German planes based in Sicily were attacking Malta by night. The idea for the offensive to come is one coordinated between air and sea, as U-boats and mines would obstruct and attack British convoys to Malta, and numerous bombing raids would hit it from the skies. Malta is actually 5 islands, 2 large and 3 small, 100 kilometers south of Sicily and 330 north of Tripoli, 400 west to Tunis, and 662 Benghazi at the east of the Gulf of Sidra. So Malta's position dominates the dent in North Africa by sea and sky. But it really is indispensable to the British to the sea route from Gibraltar to Egypt and Suez. And of course, the Italians have to pass it to supply the Axis forces in Africa. By the end of October, the British had done so much damage to Italian supply convoys that Adolf Hitler ordered loads of planes and subs and all that sent over to fight back. In December, we've seen the tables turn somewhat as the British have seriously suffered in the Mediterranean at German and Italian hands. So going into the new year, well, it's anybody's guess how things will turn out. So Germany is launching the Maltese offensive to secure their supply lines once again. Actually, when you think about it, the Allies have lost a lot of big ships the past 6 weeks. 1 fleet carrier, 1 escort carrier, 5 Royal Navy battleships, 3 sunk and 2 put out of action at Alexandria by the Italians, 5 American battleships, 4 British cruisers sunk, 2 American ones out of action. Some of those ships can be fixed, fine, but right now the naval balance is really swinging against them. Allied shipping losses for December are enormous. 285 ships for 583,700 tons. More than 430,000 of that is in the Pacific. There is, like in November, less damage done in the Atlantic because many U-boats are hunting in the less merchant ship rewarding waters of the Mediterranean and off Gibraltar. 10 U-boats were lost this month. For the whole year 1941, the Allies lost a total of 1,229 ships for 4.3 million tons. Britain has received 30 million tons of dry shipping goods. A normal year, they receive around 50 million. Cargo also arrives a lot slower using the convoy system and often has to be sent to already crowded ports, which makes things worse. Rationing was imposed a while ago, but the shortages mean it has to be ever more strict if the British war effort can continue. Another British nautical note this week. On the 27th, they launch Operation Archery, a commando raid on Malaya in Norway. This is a German naval base, and 5 merchant ships are sunk. Hitler is angered enough from this to begin talk of making the whole North Sea coast, English Channel coast, and Atlantic coast into Fortress Europe. He orders coastal fortifications built from the Arctic Circle to the Bay of Biscay. And a day after New Year's Day, 1942, this week comes to an end, with the Americans withdrawing to a stronghold in the Philippines. British plans for where to try and fight the Japanese in Malaya. The Chinese fighting the Japanese better than the Japanese expect, like pretty much every battle they fight by this point. Plans for Malta and North Africa, a declaration of the United Nations, and Joseph Stalin planning his big battle. The temperature in the USSR is once again minus 20. Martin Gilbert writes, in one day alone at the end of December, as a result of frostbite, more than 14,000 Germans had been forced to submit to amputation. Not all of them survived the operation. A further 62,000 frostbite cases were classified as moderate, not involving amputation, but resulting in a total incapacity to return to action. New Year's Day is a great day of success at Bletchley Park. 4 separate German Enigma keys are broken. Pink for top secret Luftwaffe high command messages, and Gadfly, Hornet, and Wasp, used by 3 of the Luftwaffe Fliegerkorps. On the 2nd, Kite is broken. This is the code that carries the secret supply messages between Berlin and the Eastern Front. And all this while, British supplies are still arriving at Archangel and taken by rail to Moscow. In late 1941, 750 tanks, 800 fighter planes, 1,400 vehicles, and 100,000 tons of supply arrived. This is only the beginning. And as of the new year, the Soviet armed forces have lost at least 5 million casualties, have had at least 3 million soldiers taken prisoner, and have lost over 20,000 tanks. And yet, they are not only still in the fight, they now even have the initiative. If I was Hitler, I'd be worried. The struggle in the cryptographer's room is very much tied to the war on the battlefield. If you'd like to learn more about some Allied efforts to crack Enigma, check out our special episode about that right here. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Jim Winner. It's thanks to winners like Jim, yeah, see what I did? Yeah. Okay, that we can bring you this awesome content, because it is awesome. So join the Time Ghost Army at patreon.com or timeghost.tv so we can make more of this stuff. And do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.